And obviously and understandably shaking Senator Jake Garn, who knew, of course, the members of that crew because he had...
Sears of NASA, giving us really the first feel we have this morning from an individual of what it's like to be on the shuttle. We have heard it many times before from many people, but there is Senator Garn emphasizing I think some very important things. First of all, that he would go again if NASA would have a chance, that he feels safer in the air than he does on the roads of America, that he feels the country should emphasize safe driving. And making the point, at the risk of paraphrasing him, that man does not explore the heavens without some kind of risk. That risk leading this morning to the loss of 7 Americans, including 2 women, including the first teacher in space, in a catastrophic explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger, just as it was approaching that moment of separation when the solid rocket boosters fall away and the Challenger pushes on for its first orbit in space. And also saying that in response to criticism on occasion from some people that NASA delays.
Right now, the people are glued to whatever information they can get off of their monitors. There are very few muscles twitching. Now, as you see there, right under the word Houston, that is where the flight director sits. He is the man who is in complete charge of this. And you can see them just sitting there waiting for the analysis through their...
NASA has said nothing about what happened. You can clearly see from the videotape, which we will, of course, show again as we go along with our live coverage from CBS News, but you see the explosion happen. Bruce had his small model, and we go back to the large model here. You can see on the slow motion of the videotape that the explosion happens. We said one theory was that it seemed to start maybe in the solid fuel rocket booster, the solid rocket booster, one of those. It seemed to start out there. And one of the theories, one of the working theories only, is that the explosion happened on the right side of one of those solid rocket boosters first and then spread to the main tank on which the shuttle rides, in which you have, among other things, this explosive liquid hydrogen in there. Now, that was the first theory put forward, one of the hypotheses put forward. Now Bruce is mentioning the possibility, underscore the word possibility, that in a close looking at the slow motion of the videotape, that some observers, not the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, some observers say, well, it seems that the explosion may not have actually happened in the solid rocket booster itself, but seemed to perhaps have happened, as Bruce pointed out, right in this area, the solid rocket booster attached to the main fuel tank where most of the explosive material is. And these solid rocket boosters supposedly will drop away later. They never got to that point today. Some say, well, now, perhaps you can see on the close-up, there are seams in this big tank. This is the main fuel tank. There are seams. There's a seam here and there's a seam down here. Now, the explosion, to some eyes, seems to have occurred right at this point, and so there is speculation, nothing more than that, and a theory that perhaps the explosion began in the main fuel tank itself at one of those seams. Now, it's only a theory, but Bruce, would the very low temperature in Florida this morning, 28 degrees, well below freezing on the Fahrenheit scale, have had anything to do with the ability of those seams on the main fuel tank to stand up?
Dan, I'm sorry. Now we have just restored our audio line. I did not hear your question now.
Not a problem, Bruce, and I'm sure the audience understands this is live coverage. The question is, would the low temperatures, the 28-degree temperature in Florida this morning, have affected the seams on that main fuel tank at all?
That is one of the things that they're going to be taking a very, very close look at here, because with the low temperatures, and the fact that the temperature did drop down below 28 degrees, which is a crucial one, the crucial temperature here, because that's when the icicles begin to form and when they're forming on the shuttle gantry. There is a possibility, and there is a strong possibility, that some of the icicles could have formed in connection with the main shuttle fuel tank. The fuel tank itself, the brown, orange-looking tank that you see right there on the launch pad. There was some concern. We saw a lot of icicles at the base of the launch pad about an hour before the shuttle lifted off. So we don't know if they were actually on the main fuel tank, but it is a very distinct possibility. You can see there long icicles. We were told their icicles are 2 feet in length. That appears to be actually even longer than 2 feet in length. And as the cameras panned the launch area earlier today, about an hour before the launch itself, you saw a lot of areas where there were icicles. So it is not just in a few areas where you can find the icicles. You found the icicles on the gantry around the launch pad and also right around the engine area. And an ice inspection team was called to the pad. We delayed the launch, NASA delayed the launch by approximately 1 hour, in addition to the earlier malfunction. So the
in his speech already about the space.
In the Oval Office, preparing for a background briefing he was going to have with reporter, came in and handed him a note saying that the space shuttle had exploded, no further details. Then the President, Bush, and Poindexter all went to a small study that the President has just off the Oval Office, and like everybody else, turned on their TV to see what was happening, watched, to their horror, tape replays of the explosion. He called it a, quote, very traumatic experience. He said that this will indeed cast a pall on his speech tonight, which he had hoped to use as an opportunity to push his program for the next legislative year. But he said that while they will mention it, you have to go on governing the nation. As for Christa McAuliffe, and there was a certain bitter irony in this, because Christa McAuliffe was named to the space program several months ago in the Roosevelt room, the room where we were all with the President, and at that time it was, of course...
Exists, Columbia and Challenger, the two we have become...
The last time that it was used was 10 years ago.
As the shuttle exploded, he said, of course, all the other families, many of them were also there, but they, as test pilots, the families of test pilots were more aware of the dangers of this program. He said, knowing that they were there and watching, your heart goes out to them. One other footnote, Tom, we have been told that Mrs. Reagan was upstairs in the family quarters alone and just happened to have the TV set on and was watching live when the flight lifted off and said, oh my God, no, and was very upset when she saw live the terrible tragedy.
Have ejection seats, and it could not take care of 7 people. So those were taken out after the first 4 flights, the experimental flights of the shuttle. They removed those. There also was a theory backed by most people in the space program that if there was an emergency aboard the space shuttle, there is no way that anyone could eject and survive. So because of the fact that they did not believe anyone could survive and they needed the extra room, after 4 flights of the space shuttle, they removed the ejection seats to give them more room, because it is, after all, a very cramped area. The shuttle itself is large, but the area where most of the people have to work and where the people live for the days in space is very small, and it is extremely cramped, and they need...
We'll go forward. I heard Jake Garn, and I certainly endorse everything he said, and you know, he talked about safety and NASA being conservative. It was just a couple days ago I had a discussion with some of my colleagues about that very conservatism, and we both agreed, or we all agreed at that time, that you know, for the space shuttle to be truly operational, we can't let a few clouds bother us, we can't let a few ice crystals bother us. We got to reduce or remove some of that conservatism. It's sort of a paradox, because of all that conservatism, that something like this should come up to bite us. I don't think that there's any question, but if there's any criticism anyone can ever make of NASA, is at the fact that at times they tended to be almost too careful.
Gene, I know you can now see a television set where you are at the moment. Forgive me, but where are you?
Well, I'm in my office.
Barbara Morgan of McCall, Idaho. Then for 36-year-old Sharon...
That fireball this morning. Bruce, for clarity, you mentioned that this was the, check me as we go along here, the 20...
It almost appears as if the explosion is occurring somewhere near the aft or the back end of the shuttle and or that external tank. It also appears to me, and again, far be it for me to speculate and try and be an expert at this point in time. It's going to take weeks and months to figure this one out. But it appears as if some explosion occurred at the aft end of the vehicle or aft end of the external tank, which, as we recall, carries the explosive fuel of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, and then worked its way forward, extremely quickly consuming the shuttle itself, as we also could have seen at the...
Lujan or Lujan?
Almost a fog or some of the smoke
downrange distance 7
up beside the shuttle itself, actually beside the main engine tank, the fuel tank, and that is unusual. You normally do not have anything like that occur. The first thing that most people would look at that is for some type of a leak, a possible fuel leak, a possible hole someplace.
Well, Bruce, we want to take a look now at the slow motion videotape. This was the smoke and debris coming down. This is the slow motion. And let's describe what's happening here. This is just before the explosion.
Right there, Dan, just before the explosion, you see on the top of your screen, it appears that the flames to the left of your circle, you also see some flames, and that is just before the explosion. And that is something that indicates to some people at NASA that there may have been some type of a fuel leak. Now, that still indicates that the explosion itself occurred with either the main fuel tank or from something created by the solid rocket boosters, as we have been saying.
Bruce?
And that fireball there is the main fuel tank.
Bruce, no one can forget how explosive that liquid hydrogen fuel is in the big tank. That the shuttle's own 3 main engines, the one tucked right in the tail of the shuttle itself, operate off that liquid oxygen and the liquid hydrogen. And you mentioned the possibility, there are all kinds of possibilities, but certainly any leak, anything untoward having to do with that liquid hydrogen could spell trouble in a hurry, particularly during the critical stage.
7th manned mission, where we're dealing with new complexities and speeds and powers that man has never used before. And we had hoped to push this day back forever, but that was not to be, and we all, I guess, intuitively knew that. So it's a day we don't want to repeat, that's for sure.
Senator, what effect does this have on a space program or any sort of flight test program when something like this happens?
Oh, it delays things, of course, because there will be a very complete investigation. Our view of what happened this morning would be only speculation at this point, although the very slow motion pictures I saw on one of the channels a little while ago seemed to show the first light coming out of one of the solid rocket cases. Whether that'll turn out to be the cause of the difficulty or not, I don't know. But I wouldn't think that this was, you know, what it'll do to the program or how much it'll be set back will be dependent on the investigation.
Was NASA trying to push too hard on this, Senator?
No, I don't think so. If there's one thing NASA has not done all the way through, it is take a chance on cutting corners. And we've grown accustomed to success. And it's been an amazingly successful program so far. You know, I remember one of the TV commentators, I won't say which network, but one morning talking about when there was a delay, commenting, when are we going to get turn this turkey into an eagle? We'd become so accustomed to getting these things off on time that safety was obviously being, at least in that commentator's mind, was being given short shrift. Why aren't we running these things like a regular airline schedule? Well, the fact that NASA has not done that. They've run it with the idea of safety first and foremost, and that's been the way it's been operated ever since the days when I was in that program many years ago. And it's a tribute to them that they have not been goaded under pressure to taking any chances. And we'll just have to wait the accident analysis to see what happened in this case.
Senator, were you watching the blast off this morning?
I was not. I was in a classified briefing at the time, and one of my staff people brought a note in to me about this, and then I left immediately and went up to my office.
What was your reaction, particularly to the replays you've probably seen?
Oh, my reaction was a profound sense of loss, I guess, that this day had finally come that we'd hoped would never arrive. In some ways, I guess it's, you know, in our human existence, let me be philosophical for a moment. I guess in our human existence there is triumph and there is tragedy. And man tries many things. And we advance as a whole human race because we succeed most of the time. We make advances, whether it's in space or engineering or health or medical things. Sometimes, though, we aren't perfect. And then there's a tragedy that brings us back to our own human frailties and our lack of perfection. And so that's the kind of a day we're faced with now. It's been an amazingly successful series of triumphs through the years. but it also is fraught with the possibility of tragedy, and that's what we came up against today.
When you say that this was a day that was pushed back for safety, was it inevitable that it would finally come?
Well, I think everyone that's ever had any connection with the program has felt that someday there would be a loss in flight. We're dealing with tremendous powers and speeds. You're traveling in orbit at 5 miles a second and trying to get back into the atmosphere from that kind of speed. And so, are we going to be perfect forever? I guess the answer was proven this morning, that the answer to that is no. But that doesn't mean that man doesn't keep trying in these areas and that we're not just as dedicated to seeing that this kind of research goes on.
Senator, you've been part of a small and very select community of people, the community of astronauts. What does this do to that community when something like this happens?
Well, we've never had something like this happen before, except for the pad fire, the fire on the pad that claimed 3 lives. Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chafee back in '67, I believe it was. So we went through that tragedy then, but that was not an in-flight accident. Obviously, there will be a shared sense of loss in the whole astronaut group and community, everybody associated with the whole program, whether astronauts or all those in the supporting functions. But I'm sure their dedication is going to be to find out what caused this and correct it and get on with the next flight.
Do astronauts just simply accept this as part of the job?
I think any time you go into flying or test flying, or which all of us were in prior to being in the astronaut program early on, you accept risks, but you feel that the risks are worth it for the country and the importance of what you're doing. And you're willing to take those risks. And that's the way we looked at it back then. That's the way I'm sure all of the current group of astronauts looks at it.
How much more of a tragedy is this, since it was the first launch of a citizen in space?
The loss of human life doesn't have much to do with who's military and who's civilian. It's a tragedy for their friends and families, and I don't differentiate between the loss of life, whether it was the regular flight crew or whether it was a civilian on board with them.
Well, how much does it set back the Citizen in Space program, do you think?
I don't know. I have no way of knowing at this point. They had lined up some other people to go, of course. Whether this will affect that or not, I don't know.
Do you think it should?
Does this raise questions for the SDI program?
No, I don't think so, because the technologies that were being used here as far as thrust and the engines and whatever happened here, I think probably are not likely to affect the research going on for lasers and laser projection and formable mirrors and particle beam projection and things like that. I would not think it likely that there was a connection there.
Senator, are you concerned now, or have you ever been concerned about the way NASA procures parts?
No, I never have. NASA has bent over backwards to be as safe as they possibly can be. And whether this will prove to be a one-time difficulty from whatever cause, or whether it will be a design defect that is uncovered now that we can correct, or whatever, we'll have to await analysis. But there's no way of knowing right now, just now, a couple of hours after the accident, to know what happened.
Senator, thank you very much.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator John Glenn at the Capitol Hill Press Gallery. Senator Glenn, of course, a veteran of the NASA Astronaut Corps. He talked quite eloquently, it seems to me, about the price of advancing human knowledge sometimes requires the sacrifice of human lives. And he spoke with great feeling as well about what appeared to be the deaths of the astronauts today. To his practiced eye, it did appear that the trouble may have emanated from one of the solid rocket boosters on either side of the space shuttle itself. The rest of us who've been looking at it thought that it might have come from the external tank. We don't yet have any official confirmation from NASA if, in fact, the space agency knows itself what may have happened there. There was an accumulation of ice on a very cold Florida morning today around the base of the shuttle where the main engines are situated. We're going to show that to you now, but everything indicates that there was nothing wrong at the time of liftoff today at 11:38 Eastern Time. They had been worried about weather earlier on in case they had to make an emergency landing at the Cape. There were stiff winds yesterday, for example. This is the ice that accumulated at that time. Whether that had anything to do with it, we don't know. We're just trying to show you as much as we possibly can about what was going on there before this accident today, before this terrible tragedy. For those of you just joining us, it appears that all 7 astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger were lost when it blew up about 1 minute and 15 seconds into its flight at an altitude of about 5.5 miles altogether. Krista McAuliffe, the school teacher from Concord, New Hampshire, was on board. Her husband and 2 children were watching at the time, along with her parents and members of her 3rd grade class carrying a banner that said, "Go, Krista, go." Frame by frame now, this is what happened. That is the shuttle at the bottom half of the rocket apparatus. Now the explosion begins. It's very hard to tell, but it does seem to me that it did not happen within that solid rocket booster on this side of the spacecraft. It could have happened, of course, on the other one. But there is the possibility as well that it might have happened with the external tank. That is the big tank, and we're going to repeat some of this for those of you who are watching us continually here, because we know that people are just joining us along the way. But that big orange tank is, in effect, a bomb. It is a large vessel carrying 560,000 pounds of highly volatile oxygen and hydrogen. It feeds the fuel to the main tanks, which are at the bottom of the space shuttle itself. And as they went to full throttle, from 65% power to full throttle, 104%, it was very shortly after that that the explosion occurred. So it does appear that there may have been some connection between going to full throttle and the explosion itself. And given the size of the explosion and the fact that we saw one of the solid rockets peel off to the side, it appears that that's where it may have happened. At the White House now, Deputy Press Secretary Larry speaks.
Postpone the State of the Union address that was scheduled for this evening. He will address the Congress and the American people on next Tuesday. The President, in addition, has asked the Vice President to go immediately to Cape Canaveral's Kennedy Space Center, along with the acting NASA Director, Bill Graham. The Vice President will carry with him the President's personal concern for those courageous Americans who were aboard the Space Shuttle. In addition, the President will speak to the American people from the Oval Office later this evening regarding this tragedy. The President, since learning of the tragedy shortly before noon, has conferred with Don Regan, who in turn consulted with Speaker Tip O'Neill and Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole. They concurred in the President's decision to delay his State of the Union. A few moments ago, the President met in the Oval Office with NASA Director Graham and instructed him to fly to the Cape with the Vice President to begin an effort to find out the cause of this tragedy. And then the President said to go forward with the nation's space program. The President said, and I quote, "These people were dedicated to the exploration of space. We could do no more to honor them, these courageous Americans, than to go forward with the program."
Can you tell us some of the reasoning in the decision to postpone, since, as you know, the President's first reaction was to go ahead with tonight's speech?
I think the President, like all Americans, has seen this tragedy unfold on television and has felt keenly what those family members must have felt watching that shuttle go into the air at the Cape, first pride and then second horror. The President feels that these same emotions are being experienced by people all over this nation at this moment. And with the consultation of Congress that's taken place in the last hour or so, the President thought it was entirely appropriate that his State of the Union be deferred until address the American people on what's happening here tonight.
Administrator Graham, finally, what happened this nation?
No, the NASA has issued a statement indicating simply there was an explosion with the space shuttle off from the Cape this morning. Rescue mission is underway. That is continuing at this hour until all efforts to find out what the situation in there are exhausted.
Does the President believe...
Right. Great.
Larry, is the President also going to cancel his State of the Union activities for the balance of the weekend? What time is the remarks tonight?
The president will will for the balance of the week continue on his previously announced schedule, with the exception of those activities which were designed as a follow-up to the State of the Union. They will be rescheduled for next week. The time of the address to the nation has not been determined, pending definite word from NASA about the situation.
Just Treasury and the high school he is not going to visit now.
That's right.
Larry,
Larry,
can you
let's
tell
go one at a
us,
time.
the President have any plans to travel or attend any memorial service for the...
Well, at the moment, you know, the NASA is still conducting its search mission there, and of course there's been no memorial service set. The Vice President does go with the personal expression of the part of the President of his concern to those families there, and no travel plans are set as yet.
Larry, two questions. First of all, I know you haven't had any official word, but is the White House operating on the basis that all of the people on the shuttle are dead?
Well, Chris, like every American, we hope, and until we find out otherwise, that hope will continue.
And secondly, to follow up on an earlier question, we were told by the President a few moments ago that he intended to go ahead with the State of the Union. In fact, said while it would cast a pall, the business of governing the nation must go on. What changed his mind in really a very short period of time?
Well, as I indicated to your colleague over here just a moment ago, is that the President, like all Americans, watched this on television, and he felt very keenly the emotion that must be felt by the families of those down there, and watch this event in person, and very keenly what the American people must be feeling. And the consensus opinion of the executive and the legislative branch was that it was appropriate to...
But President Reagan will go on television and talk about today's tragedy, and the President has said he is now more committed than ever to the space program. The time of tonight's speech has not yet been determined. We'll have the latest on this story as details become available, and also on News 9 primetime at 8 tonight, we'll tell you about Donald Mannis's decision to step aside temporarily as Queensborough president. Join us at 8.
Larry speaks in the White House press briefing room, just completing that live briefing to reporters who are assembled there. He made several major announcements. The President's State of the Union address tonight has been postponed until Tuesday of next week. The White House saying that the President initiated that decision. We also had word from Capitol Hill that both House Speaker Thomas P. Tip O'Neill and the Senate Majority Leader Robert Dole of Kansas concurred in that decision, that there were efforts being made up there even before the White House came to its decision that they ought to, in fact, postpone tonight's State of the Union address. The President, however, will address the nation tonight from the Oval Office. The time, as of now, undetermined. As soon as we have that time for you, of course, we'll bring it to you. Vice President Bush and the administrator of NASA will be dispatched to the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida today, where they will be the President's personal representatives to determine what has happened there. It has now been about 2.5 hours since this tragedy occurred, this traumatic shock to the nation. 7 astronauts apparently lost in a gigantic explosion about 5 miles up in space, about 1 minute and 15 seconds after the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger today. It was witnessed by the parents, the husband, and the children of Krista McAuliffe, who is the school teacher, of course, riding along today, and apparently she has been lost. Also, members of her 3rd grade class were there with a banner that read, "Go, Krista, go." In Concord, New Hampshire, the high school had been assembled in an auditorium, 1,500 altogether, to watch on television this launch. And across the country, for that matter, young people have been watching what happened today.
There had been a delay this morning. There had been some bad weather at the Cape yesterday. There had been some problems with a hatch. This morning, as it has been on so many occasions before, this was the 10th flight for Challenger. A picture-perfect launch against the bright blue skies of the Atlantic. And those great
engines beginning throttling down now.
Cigar case-looking things underneath the shuttle, the big white, if you have color, solid booster fuel rockets on the outside, and in the middle, that enormous tank of liquid hydrogen and oxygen, the main tank. Go with throttle up, increase your power to make orbit, and it will be hard to forget the voice of the mission control communicator, talking on as he reads off his telemetry, not aware, as those who were watching it were aware, that this tragedy had occurred.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation.
The search in the Atlantic, about 8 to 10 miles off in the immediate area of Cape Canaveral, goes on. Here's Lieutenant Colonel Robert Nicholson of the Air Force to describe what they're doing.
And what role do you play? You understand we were delayed by approximately an hour after the accident from entering the scene because of falling debris. There was the range safety officer at Cape Canaveral, looking at his radar, determined that debris was falling from the altitudes, and I don't have the highest altitude, but debris continued to fall for 50 minutes and more. And obviously you can't send aircraft and ships into an area where debris is falling, where they themselves may be endangered.
How soon after the explosion were you in the area? In the
we were several of these helicopters, and I know the Coast Guard hydrofoil was on the outskirts of the scene immediately, but there was a delay between when they could go in until the debris was clear. The range safety officer said that they were cleared in.
They were there as part of the contingent?
Lieutenant Colonel Robert Nicholson of the U.S. Air Force telling us some very preliminary and very sketchy details of what they've been able to do in terms of mounting a search in the search area just off Cape Canaveral. ABC's Steve Shepard of the Pentagon.
For the Space Shuttle Challenger, happening about 11:39 Eastern Time. And you see now what appears to be one of the solid booster rockets. This again is the family. This is Christy McAuliffe, astronaut, or rather Teacher McAuliffe's family there. Her mother, her father there, other members of the family. At first they didn't know what was happening. Then it became clear when they said they had a major problem, and then the communications people down at NASA at the Cape, over the public relations or public address system, stated that there had been an explosion. A tragedy indeed. It is the first loss of American life aboard.
He too was a veteran of the shuttle, making his first shuttle flight in 1984, bringing his background in physics and laser technology to the program. The third mission specialist on today's launch was Air Force Colonel Ellison Onizuka, age 39, born in Hawaii. A former aerospace engineer and pilot, he had taught at the elite Air Force Test Pilot School in California. He became a NASA astronaut in 1979. Onizuka was on his second shuttle mission. His initial flight in 1984 was the first dedicated to the Department of Defense. He was married with 2 children. Gregory Jarvis, a payload specialist, age 41, was a Hughes aircraft engineer on board to conduct tests on the effects of weightlessness on fluids carried in tanks. Born in Detroit, trained as an Air Force satellite engineer, this was Jarvis's first shuttle mission. He is survived by his wife. And finally, Krista McAuliffe, age 37, the social studies teacher from New Hampshire, the first private citizen selected to fly aboard the shuttle. She'd been chosen from more than 11,000 applicants nationwide. She's survived by her husband, 2 children, and the students in Concord, New Hampshire.
ABC Stone Phillips, I'm sorry it took us a while to get to that, to bring you the human dimension of the other people in the crew, and the reason I think for that is because Krista McAuliffe was the first civilian in space, the first teacher, and as is our and the nation's tendency, you tend to focus, I think, on the first. But there is some indication of the human side of the other 6 members of the crew who all appear to have lost their lives over the Atlantic Ocean this morning. Just to pick up on a couple of pieces of information, the Space Agency now says it is going to have at least a statement at 3:30 this afternoon Eastern Time. The indication so far that we're getting, certainly from the White House and from Cape Canaveral and from Houston, is that they do not know a great deal yet, but by 3:30 this afternoon Eastern Time they will have something to say. Larry Speaks in his briefing to White House reporters announcing that the State of the Union was going to be officially postponed for a week also alluded to the fact that the President might want to talk to the nation this evening about this human tragedy and this clear setback to America's adventures in space. And even while he said that one of the great ways to honor these people would be to go ahead with the space program, the President may indeed want to share his thoughts with the nation this evening in a more personal way than via Mr. Speaks. And if he does, we shall, of course, be here to bring them to you. ABC's Lynn Scher, who covers space on a regular basis for us, is standing by in California. Lynn, I know you've been trying to talk to some other people who were involved.
Asked him what he thought, what his first impressions were. He said that unless something shows up on long-range telescopes or on telemetry, Dr. Paget said that that would be the worst thing of all, because there would be no way to...
Now, as you can see, in today's launch, as compared with the successful launch on October 30th, there was an explosion, perhaps a small one first, it appeared to be, and then definitely the larger one. That explosion occurred about a minute and 12 seconds, 12 to 15 seconds into the launch. Now, in the successful launch seen on the right-hand side of your picture, on the successful launch, the booster rockets would not separate for perhaps another 50 seconds until the launch was more than 2 minutes into flight. That's when they were scheduled to separate. Watch on the right-hand side of your screen. This is a videotape of the launch last October 30th. And the booster rockets, the solid booster rockets, separated as they were designed to do back on last October 30th. Remember that there are, Leo Krupp, there are 4 of these space shuttle vehicles. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, there are 4 of the space shuttle. The Challenger being just one. Wanted to double check that. The Challenger being just one. Now, the Challenger made that successful flight last October 30th, which you saw on the right-hand side of the screen in that split-screen comparison. And everything during that flight went very well. And it just passed the 2-minute mark. The solid rocket boosters fell away into the ocean to be reused again as they were designed to do. This morning, between 1 minute and 12 seconds and 1 minute and 15 seconds into the flight, before today's flight ever reached that stage, there was first what appeared to be a minor explosion down on what Leo Krupp thinks may have been, please mark the word may have been on the lower side of the left-hand solid rocket booster. Small flame indication there, maybe 1 or 2, and then the large explosion. So they never got to the point where the solid rocket boosters would fall away. The explosion entailed the entire Space Shuttle Challenger apparatus. The Space Shuttle itself, the huge tank of liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen on which it basically rides, and the 2 solid rocket boosters, all intact at the moment of the explosion.
You made it down to the last 10. Did you think then, maybe?
Well, then the possibility became very real, and I really started to think what the impact would be on my teaching career and on my family, but it was still really exciting.
Has it all hit you yet?
No, I don't think so. I still can't believe that I'm going to actually be going into that shuttle. It just really doesn't seem possible. Maybe when I'm on the launch pad it will.
What are you most excited about?
Seeing the Earth from that perspective of that small planet, you know, it's such a big place here, but being able to look at it from a new perspective, and I hope I can bring that wonder and that excitement back to the students.
Maybe just a little bit of fright, too?
Not yet. Maybe when I'm strapped in and those rockets are going off underneath me, there will be, but space flight today really seems safe. We had a good example of that when NASA shut down the last one through the computer because one of the backup systems wasn't working.
You say it seems safe. A lot of people equate that with it also seems boring. Have you been one, have you been one who followed NASA efforts all along, long before?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I can remember watching the Vanguards as they went like this, and I remember Alan Shepard's first suborbital flight, and it was really thrilling.
I read where you said you wanted to demystify space. In plain talk, what does that mean?
Well, we see the space program as a science or math or technological adventure right now. I want the students to get a little bit of ownership. I want them to feel that they're part of the space age because they're the future and their children or grandchildren are going to be pioneering that. So I really hope to bring an ordinary person's perspective to this.
Have you heard from some of your students yet?
Yes, I have. They've been dropping by the house, they've been sending me cards, they've been calling. That's been super.
NASA, of course, has a selfish interest in all this. I mean, they want to build up public support for the huge outlays that are necessary to keep the program going. As part and parcel of being the first ordinary citizen, I mean, are you expected to be the ordinary speaker who's out there making speeches on NASA's behalf all along?
That's going to come. Certainly will, but I'm also delighted that the teaching profession and students and the whole country is really going to benefit from this. We hopefully are going to know an awful lot more about what life is like aboard the shuttle.
Yeah. You go up on January the 22nd.
That's what the date is, yes,
of 86,
right now.
and we're hoping that that'll be met. What are you most concerned about between now and then?
Well, probably just getting my life in order. I do have a family in Concord, New Hampshire, and I have to get them set. I also want to make sure my replacement in school is going to be comfortable for next year.
Any thoughts, however slight, that you might not measure up once it gets going?
Well, one of the things that has been really surprising is all of the publicity, and I was saying to my husband the other night, it's almost like I'm reading about somebody else, you know?
Well, it's a dream come true for you.
Oh, it certainly is.
Krista McAuliffe, congratulations.
Thank you again.
Good luck. We'll see you in January.
Thank you.
We'll take a break here. This is Today.
The first private citizen astronaut, Krista McAuliffe, there in an interview, a tape-recorded interview with Bryant Gumbel on the Today Show some weeks ago, talking about how proud she was to have been chosen to be a part of this space shot, this tragedy. It's all but now impossible to think that she could have really survived the crash today, the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger, along with 6 of the astronauts, 7 altogether aboard the shuttle. Let's go back now to Washington and Tom Brokaw.
John, that was such a poignant interview. You can see why she was so appealing and attractive to NASA. She was outgoing and enthusiastic, and of course she talked with great enthusiasm about the confidence that she had in the space agency itself. Today, that moment of triumph came for her and ended very shortly after liftoff, about 1 minute and 15 seconds, that enormous explosion, and as you indicated, no survivors. Krista McAuliffe and 6 other astronauts appear to have perished in that gigantic fireball about 5 miles up in space, 1 minute and 15 seconds after liftoff today. Dan Molina is at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas now, where he's been keeping track of what information he can gather there. Dan?
Tom, no new information. I must say it seems so sad and strange to glance up at some of the information readouts that we get from NASA here. There's an indication, MET, mission elapsed time. That's the time that the mission would have lasted had it gone on. Oh, you can see it on your screen there. 3 hours, 12 minutes, 16, 17, 18 seconds. That's it, had it not ended in the terrible, terrible tragedy this morning. And I must echo John's observation. It seems all but impossible now to look back to this morning when we were talking about ice problems, little problems, something that NASA has been so cautious about, little problems all the way along the line. And this morning, though, it looked like those little problems were going to be overcome. We saw a very happy crew first thing this morning. You just saw Krista McAuliffe. There's the crew with their traditional breakfast, the cake in front of them. Everybody ready to go this morning. They had glitches along the line, but this morning there was that attitude like today we were going to get off the launch pad. We're ready to go. NASA's ready.
Those are the parents, Ed and Grace Corrigan, the parents of Krista McAuliffe. It appears at this point they don't know what has happened, but others, of course, realize that something seriously has gone wrong. In slow motion now. To my eye, at least, it appears that the entire external tank just came apart and became one gigantic fireball. It would have been, at that point, a bomb. To the right, you see the solid rocket booster peeling off. It appears that it was that big fuel tank that we see attached to it, the largest part of the shuttle program, that just seemed to come apart. And, of course, it is chock-a-block with volatile oxygen and hydrogen to fuel the main engines. The parents, Ed and Grace Corrigan, as they were watching that, didn't quite know what to believe as we looked at them. And of course, this was their first launch, and as they looked at it, it appeared that there may have been a second booster going off one kind or another. But unfortunately, that was not the case at all. In Concord, New Hampshire, where Krista McAuliffe was a school teacher, the entire community was involved, as you might expect. Her 3rd grade class was at Cape Canaveral today with a large banner watching that tragic scene. The banner said, "Go, Krista, go." And at a high school, what happened to Krista's husband and children and her parents? Do you know? Where were they taken?
Well, they were, of course, escorted by NASA personnel, and I'm sure that they were taken back to the astronaut quarters, which is only a couple of miles from here, and I'm sure they're in seclusion there.
And as you looked at that videotape, as we looked at it together, what was your judgment, Jay? You've watched a lot of these go up, of course, and you've not seen anything quite like this before. But did it appear to you, as it did to me, that it could have been the external tank that went first?
I don't think there's any question about it, Tom. I think you're absolutely correct. It was the external tank. Now, the question is, when they told him he was go for throttle up, he increased the throttle pressure, increased the thrust on the 3' engines. The question is, was there a flare-back of the engines at that time? If there was a flare-back, this could have erupted the external fuel tank. There could have been any kind of eruption.
Launch this morning. Of the 7 Americans.
Why it occurred, of course, is the question.
6 years old, born in Washington State. Pilot, his co-pilot, Michael Smith, age 40, United States Navy, from Morehead City, North Carolina. 36-year-old Judith Resnick, PhD, mission specialist, born in Akron, Ohio, has been looking forward to be America's 2nd NASA person into space who is female. She talked about how she looked forward to this trip, following in the path of Judy Ride, the first American woman in space. Also aboard today, 35-year-old Ronald McNair, PhD from Lake City, South Carolina, a mission specialist. And from Hawaii, United States Air Force Major and mission specialist for NASA, 39-year-old Ellison Onizuka. From Detroit, 41-year-old Gregory Jarvis, the payload specialist, the man in charge of those satellites that were to be thrown out of the cargo bay. And 37-year-old Krista McAuliffe from Concord, New Hampshire, the school teacher who was selected to be aboard this flight. Dr. Thomas O. Paine, former NASA administrator and now chairman of the National Commission on Space, has joined our friend Leo Krupp in our newsroom in Los Angeles. Dr. Paine, I'm sorry it has to be under these circumstances. What
oxygen and hydrogen, and it fuels the main engines, which are located at the very base down here of the Shuttle Challenger, and the other shuttles for that matter as well. They're used on liftoff, and then they're used as well to get them into orbit. Then they're fired up once again when they come back into the Earth's atmosphere. You remember that phrase, MECO, that's main engine cutoff. They fire them up to about 65% on liftoff, then they go to 104% or even higher if they need to go into the orbit itself. And it was just at that point when they went past 65%, past 100%, full throttle, shortly after that, that this appeared to just break into flames. And then, of course, we saw that large fireball. So the indications are, at the outset at least, that it happened somewhere in here, possibly in these ducts. And as Jay Barbary indicated, there are ducts that lead from the external tank here back into the main engines. That's where it may have occurred. There's always the possibility that a number of other things could have happened as well that then triggered all of this fuel that is contained there. At any rate, it's like a giant rocket going off, a Roman candle, if you will, with two on each side and a much larger one in the middle. And people positioned right up here, 7 of them all together today, with no means of getting out of there once they have launched. That is, that there is no escape hatch of any kind, no ejection seat. And based on what we saw today, there was very little to eject from, tragically enough. To remind you, in about 20 minutes, we expect to have a press briefing from the officials at NASA at the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida. We may know more then. Of course, they have a wide variety of data, telemetry of all kinds, signals coming in electronically and otherwise. They'll be looking at that and analyzing it, if in fact they can. The entire country shocked by what we have witnessed here today. I'm sure that we're bound together in our common sympathy for the families of all the people who are involved. And there are grave political and economic questions raised as well. John Dancy is on Capitol Hill now, and he has the reaction of some of the principal players there. John?
Tom, probably no program has enjoyed the kind of support that the space program has enjoyed throughout its history here. Through periods of budget austerity and financial crisis, the space program has continued to enjoy support from many members here. There is no indication that despite this tragedy today, it is going to have any less support. A number of members of Congress, both on the House and the Senate side, have been in the respective press galleries giving their reaction to what happened today. Let's start off with some of it. This was Congressman Manuel Lujan, who is chairman of the House Science and Technology Committee. He was with Dr. Graham, the NASA administrator, when it happened.
We learned that there had been an explosion in the vehicle, and he said, "Oh my God, you know, what a terrible thing to happen," and was very visibly shaken and ran out of the office and went to his office.
Well, it's very difficult for me to talk about it because these were my friends. Mike Smith, the pilot, was my mother hen the first month that I trained. They assigned him to me, go to my classes and help brief me. And I don't know of any time that I have been more shocked or more moved than when my first wife was killed in an automobile accident. And so it's been very, very difficult for me this morning.
I don't think that it's time to start examining whether or not we continue with programs, but certainly, at least, we ought to take a deep breath and step back before we go ahead with any further manned flights.
Let me be philosophical for a moment. I guess in our human existence there is triumph and there is tragedy. And man tries many things. And we advance as a whole human race because we because we succeed most of the time. We make advances, whether it's in space or engineering or health or medical things. Sometimes, though, we aren't perfect. And then there's a tragedy that brings us back to our own human frailties and our lack of perfection. And so that's the kind of a day we're faced with now. It's been an amazingly successful series of triumphs through the years. But it also is fraught with the possibility of tragedy, and that's what we came up against today.
Tom, Senator Glenn and Senator Garn, the two senators who have flown in space, will be going with the Vice President in about 15 minutes from now, headed for Cape Canaveral to be there and to console the families who today were struck by this tragedy. Tom?
John, I think that we'll also hear later this afternoon from Congressman Bill Nelson. It is in his district that the Kennedy Space Center is located, and he flew on the most recent of these space shuttle flights as well. We've not yet heard from him today, but are you hearing up there that we could very likely hear from him as well?
Congressman Nelson has scheduled a press conference at about 4 o'clock this afternoon he was on the most recent space flight, as a matter of fact. Came back from it very successfully, very much a booster of the space program, as are most members of Congress, Tom. It is a program that has really enjoyed tremendous success here, even back during the 60s when we were first trying to get to the moon. There was a lot of talk about we ought not to be doing this, we ought to be putting our money somewhere else. But in fact, Congress continued to support it and continues to support the...
Accidents like this frequently later have to be modified, so I don't think I would speculate except to say that very clearly there was a catastrophic failure of the external fuel tank, and what initiated it will have to, I think, we'll have to wait and see what the analysis shows.
Dr. Payne, what about this very ambitious launch schedule on safety in general? Now, let's set aside the direct question, whether it affected today's launch. We have no way of knowing. But there was a very ambitious launch schedule, and there was considerable pressure, was there not?
Well, you're absolutely right. I think the real significance here is that we have, in the space shuttle, the entire national launch capability for many of the payloads that are proposed for the shuttle. So therefore, the loss of the shuttle, while we have to go back and rework and find out how to fix this problem before we fly again, is going to cause some very severe dislocations in the nation's space program. The nature of this dislocation remains to be seen, but there's no question it's going to be a very serious problem.
Dr. Payne, if you can still hear me, the effect on congressional support for the space program.
As we watch all of this, holding out the slimmest of hope that perhaps one of the astronauts or all of them could have survived, although that seems almost totally unlikely at this time. Are you hearing any real profound discussion about what the program may do?
People here, of course, react in a very human fashion to what's going on. They're just as human as the rest of us in a situation like this, and they were just as stunned as the rest of us by this news. What every senator and every House member has said is that there has to be a pause. NASA must not fly another shuttle until we know what happened. The consensus seems to be that NASA should examine it, that they have the expertise. There should not necessarily be a blue ribbon panel, but that NASA should go ahead now, examine what happens. It is still, to a certain extent, a test program, and in any test program, you are going to expect failures like this. Congress, the reaction from here has been, in that sense, very mature and not hysterical. No one has said, oh, let's call it off because it's just not working.
But there are real financial constraints in the country already, and this space shuttle that blew up today cost more than $1 billion, probably cost $1.5 billion to replace it. That's going to have an effect, no matter how we feel about it right now, on the...
25 seconds after blastoff today, there's no indication that any of the 7 Americans aboard the space shuttle survived. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration has scheduled a news conference, the first really word that it's had to say since the tragedy, for 3:30 Eastern Time this afternoon, coming up in about 12 or 13 minutes. This is part of our CBS News live coverage, which we've been on since shortly after the tragedy occurred this morning. We will be bringing you live from Cape Canaveral, Florida, that National Aeronautics and Space Administration news conference from Florida. We also want to point out that contrary to an earlier announcement, President Reagan now has decided that he will not go through with his previously scheduled State of the Union address this evening. The State of the Union address has been postponed for 1 week until next Tuesday by President Reagan. However, The President has had Larry Speaks, his principal spokesman at the White House, say that he, President Reagan, plans to talk to the American people sometime during this day or possibly this evening about what the White House calls this tragedy. We have no details yet on when President Reagan will be speaking or what form that will take, but CBS News does intend to carry that live if at all possible. And of course we will have full details on everything that we can report on this evening's CBS Evening News. Now, the rescue ships and helicopters that raced to the point 18 miles off the Florida coast where the debris from the shuttle came down. The debris rained into the ocean for about 45 minutes, and the rescue ships and some of the planes and helicopters were delayed getting into the area because the debris was raining down. So reports from that area say that still all the rescue ships have seen, and that includes the paramedics who were parachuted actually into the sea to help with the search, that the most they have found are rather small pieces of debris. The spaceship was being propelled by 2 solid fuel booster rockets and its 3 main hydrogen burning engines. Those are the small engines at the tail of the spacecraft itself. The pilot and the co-pilot were throttling up just before, in the seconds before the explosion occurred. It was not immediately determined if the source of the explosion was one of the boosters or in the main engine system. It may be a long while before anyone knows. There had been a 2-hour delay in the launch of the space shuttle this morning because of the extreme cold for Florida, about 28 degrees. There were icicles over much of the space shuttle and the apparatus that gets it into launch. NASA delayed the launch for 2 hours this morning, made a number of close inspections, and then as the weather began to heat up, NASA felt it could go ahead with the launch. It did. Everything looked all right for about 65 to 68 seconds. Then there was an indication only, as we saw the slow motion videotape later, an early indication that something might be wrong, and then suddenly 72 to 75 seconds in, a major explosion and a ball of flame. Mission Control in Houston said very early after the tragedy that it had no indication of any trouble aboard the spacecraft. The last words heard from the spacecraft were, "Roger, throttle up." That meant that they were going to take the throttle from about 60 to 65% of power on up for power as they tried to get the space shuttle thrown forward closer to orbit. Keep in mind, as we pointed out several times, that the space shuttle's own engines are not enough to get it off the launch pad and throw it toward orbit. That's the reason they have those solid rocket boosters. The solid rocket boosters, after they do their job of getting the whole payload off the ground and headed toward outer space, they drop away. The space shuttle's engines then continue on, drawing on the liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen in the main tank to put the spacecraft on into orbit. 2 senators and a congressman, we're now told, have flown in space, and they had this reaction to today's tragedy.
There is risk. Know when it's going to happen, A, and B, is he going to talk to the nation tonight?
Well, it's going to happen a week from today. That's what Press Secretary Speaks said. He is going to speak from the Oval Office for about 5 minutes, sometime a little later today, but it's not scheduled as a prime-time speech, Peter. As soon as NASA holds its news conference, about 3:30 Eastern Time, the White House is going to gear up, and perhaps in the next hour or 2 after that, the President will deliver a very short 5-minute speech.
But the President, the Vice President, Sam, is clearly going to the Cape as a mark of respect rather than as a member of an investigating team, right?
Well, that's his first thing. Maybe I misunderstood you when you said, does he have any other brief or a brief? I thought perhaps you meant, does he have any other duties when he went down there?
No, and if you misunderstood me, it's probably at this point, Sam, because I misspoke. Any changes at the White House now in the last few hours?
No, I think now everything is in a routine after they've made this decision to cancel the State of the Union. As you know, first, Peter, in fact, in talking to reporters, I said to him, but it will cast a pall over your speech tonight, which is going to be an upbeat speech if you deliver it. He said, yes, that's true, but you can't stop governing the nation. But after he went back to the Oval Office, I'm told that almost everyone, including the President, thought about it a little bit and unanimously decided they couldn't go ahead with this speech. That to do so would be misunderstood completely and would be totally out of place.
Sam, does the President have any passionate personal interest in space, such as, for example, John Kennedy had?
No, there's no evidence that Mr. Reagan has any interest such as that in space. He's followed it as most laymen have, and of course as president he's had to pass on appropriations and things like that, but he doesn't refer to it often He has not pushed it in speeches throughout the years. It is clearly not one of his top priorities.
I heard one reporter at a White House briefing we heard earlier with our speaks asking whether or not this was going to have any effect on the Strategic Defense Initiative or Star Wars program. I assume that was just a question, was it?
Well, I assume it was, because in fact, whenever he delivers his State of the Union message a week from today, as I say, he has a line in there, once again, saying that we must have the Strategic Defense Initiative and that he intends to pursue it. So he feels very strongly about that, and he's going to say so in his State of the Union message.
Sometimes the White House does feel, or the administration appears to feel, Sam, as if events, just events in the abstract sense, and this would qualify as one, gets, in a sense, in the way of the White House agenda. As you said, the President was very up for the State of the Union this evening. Any sense of that at all?
Well, I think people here are all...
And the spacecraft, in increasingly small pieces of debris, rained down into the ocean off the coast of Florida. Now, we want to use our small model. We're going to give a slow motion videotape look at what happened. But before we do so, a review. This is a scale model. This is the space shuttle itself. Keep in mind the crew has only a small area in which it's actually housed for most of the time. Most of the space shuttle is in the cargo area. Down below that, the cargo area that opens up, that's where the satellites are launched from once the shuttle gets into orbit. The space shuttle itself sets aboard a huge fuel tank, about 500,000 pounds of liquid oxygen and hydrogen. This fuel is what fuels the space shuttle's own engines, the 3 engines right in the tail of the space shuttle. But those 3 engines are not enough to get the space shuttle up into orbit. So on launch, the space shuttle's own engines have to be going, drawing on the liquid oxygen and hydrogen fuel, and the 2 solid rocket boosters off to the side of the main fuel tank are part of the original launch configuration. These are the solid rocket boosters. At launch, the solid rocket boosters go, the space shuttle's own 3 engines go, and to get it off the pad, then the commander of the space shuttle throttles back to about 60% in order to get maximum effect. The aerodynamics of the situation require him, with gravity figured in, to throttle back to about 60-65% of power. In what we will call the left, in the lower side of the left solid rocket booster, you will first see some little indications of possible flames could have been caused by vapors, and then the whole explosion occurred. Let's go now to the slow motion videotape as we wait and prepare for NASA's news conference. You see the little flame in the middle left-hand side. Then the beginnings of an explosion. Just exactly where it's happening, hard to tell. Could be in the solid rocket boosters, could be in the main tank. Then, once the explosion, the flames explosion reach the main tank, which has that highly explosive, highly volatile liquid hydrogen, the space shuttle is obliterated. No ejection seats aboard the space shuttle. The early space shuttles had ejection seats, but after the first 3 or 4 flights, ejection seats, because of the increasing numbers of people put aboard the space shuttle and the belief that ejection seats wouldn't do any good, there were no ejection seats on this space shuttle. Note in the upper right-hand quarter of the screen, I know that that's gone off of your screen for the moment, there was a piece of what is believed to be the right-hand solid rocket booster. You see in the upper right-hand quarter, that's it, a piece, if not indeed the entire, what is believed to be the right-hand side solid rocket booster. Remember that the early indication of trouble was on the lower left-hand solid rocket booster side. No ejection seats aboard the space shuttle today. As Leo Krupp, our consultant with CBS News from years past, has pointed out, there is a moment, a second, one's tempted to say a nanosecond, but just a few seconds in which the pilot of the space shuttle, the commander and the pilot or co-pilot who's monitoring, when he sees a red light, there's a few seconds there where if he knows there is trouble, that he can have the spacecraft itself separate from all of this fuel and the solid rocket boosters. That did not happen today as far as anyone can determine. NASA at Mission Control.
The Atlantic. Out in the search area itself, the Pentagon has sent out a number of recovery ships to look in what I guess everyone now believes is the vain hope that there will have been a survivor. Remember, they were 10 miles up. And if you've been with us for much of the day, you will have heard us said before that there was no escape capsule on board the shuttle. There was an earlier one on a Columbia very early on, but none of the other 3 space shuttles, there are 4, which are being used in rotation for the 15 missions planned this year, none of the others have an escaped craft or escaped capsule on them. And again, I defer to Gene Cernan, the Apollo astronaut who's been so helpful to us today, to say that looking as he has done time and time again at the explosion which occurred about 2 minutes and 10 seconds after liftoff, that even if there had been an escape capsule, it would not have been much help. At any rate, out in the recovery area, about somewhere between 8 and 20 and perhaps even farther miles off the coast of Florida and Cape Canaveral, the U.S. Navy has a couple of hydrofoils out and a frigate. The Coast Guard has sent out a couple of cutters, and there are helicopters in the area as well as a C-130, all doing a sea and aerial search at the moment, obviously as their prime goal for some sense of the crew, but certainly for the debris as a result of this overwhelming explosion, which occurred at almost 2,000 miles an hour, so that they can begin to painstakingly put the pieces together as Vice President Bush leaves Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington to go off to Cape Canaveral with very much the same questions in mind as everyone else in the nation must have at the moment. What happened after those, what surely will become well-remembered words? Roger, go, throttle up. The last words we heard from the mission control communicator, the commander on the ground, saying that they could go to full power to give it that last boost, the Space Shuttle Challenge.
You heard Commander Francis Scobie was told by Mission Control in Houston to throttle up.
Very carefully at the situation.
Then he said, Roger, he was throttling up.
Major malfunction.
Mission Control in Houston, stunned, doesn't know what has happened, says,
We have no downlink.
Obviously, there's been a malfunction, as they called it. No downlink, no communication. By this time, horror was setting in at Mission Control in Houston and everywhere as debris began to rain down into the sea. Now, the critical moments in slow motion. Look for the indication of explosion of small flame down low on the left-hand middle side of your picture. There they are. This is just before the major explosion. Then the igniting of the main fuel tank, where all that liquid hydrogen, 500,000 pounds of it, goes up. The spacecraft was traveling at close to 2,000 miles an hour at the time. It may not be an important point. Will someone please check that the speed was about 2,000 miles an hour? Those aboard the spacecraft today, commander and his pilot, co-pilot. The commander was Francis Dick Scobie, 46 years old, from the state of Washington, married and with 2 children. This was his second mission and his first command of a shuttle mission. He is a retired major from the United States Air Force. Michael Smith, the pilot, 40 years old, from Beaufort, North Carolina, married, 3 children. This was his first mission. He is a commander in the United States Navy and is a graduate of the United States Naval Academy. Mike Smith. Judith Resnick, mission specialist, 36 years old, PhD from Akron, Ohio, unmarried. She has a doctorate in electrical engineering and is a classical pianist. This was her second mission. She was trained to operate the shuttle's robot arm. Judith Resnick was the second American woman in space, Sally Ride being the first. This was Judith Resnick's second mission. Also aboard today, mission specialist Ronald McNair, 35 years old, from Lake City, South Carolina, married, father of 2 children. He has a doctorate in physics from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. This was his second flight. McNair, one of the pioneering black astronauts. Mission specialist Ellison Onizuka, 39 years old, from Hawaii, married with 2 children. Air Force colonel. This was his second flight. His first flight was a secret one for the United States Defense Department, that controversial mission some months back when the Pentagon had a secret mission in space. Onizuka was aboard that mission. Today's mission was nothing secret about it. Among the things to be accomplished was an exploration of some of Halley's comet. Greg Jarvis, payload specialist, the employee of Hughes Aircraft, 41 years old. He is an electrical engineer. Greg Jarvis, the employees of Hughes Aircraft, he was bumped from 2 previous flights, but was finally getting a chance to go. His job was to conduct experiments on how liquids behave in the weightlessness of space. And Sharon Krista McAuliffe, 37-year-old social studies teacher, born in Boston, Massachusetts, a high school social studies teacher in Concord, New Hampshire. She's been a teacher since 1970, was selected from some 11,146 American school teachers who applied to be NASA's first citizen in space. Married, 2 small children. She was to have taught 2 15-minute lessons, conducted class in space on day 4 of the mission. Not to be, since Space Shuttle Challenger exploded today shortly after launch. Now, some 1,200 students at the Concord, New Hampshire High School gathered this morning to watch the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger and cheer on their teacher. Their social studies teacher, Krista McAuliffe, was on board, and the mood in the beginning and through the first 30 seconds was jubilant.
We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Be a loss to the school, but most of all, it'd be a loss to a family and of friends, and it's just too awful to contemplate. It's just awful. A thing like this would happen.
Schoolteacher McAuliffe's parents, Edward and Grace Corrigan, were watching from a VIP area about 3 miles from the launch pad. The scenes we just showed you were from Mrs. McAuliffe's school in Concord, New Hampshire. Up in a ball of flame, down in fire. NASA said the fine pieces of debris continued to fall into the impact area, that is just southeast of the launch pad, for nearly 45 minutes. Recovery boats and aircraft had to wait until the rain of debris stopped before entering the area. Paramedics parachuted into the water. Some of them leaped into the water from helicopters, seeking to find any trace of survivors. There was no trace. Only small pieces of debris. In slow-motion videotape, this is what happened during the critical moments of the explosion. Indication of trouble in the lower middle left-hand side of your screen. Nobody knows what it could have been. Then signs that a larger explosion is coming. And the main fuel tank goes. After the explosion, the 2 solid fuel booster rockets separated. At least one of them continued to fly crazily out of control in the clear sky, trailing long tails of smoke before it plummeted into the seas. You will see a small, well, perhaps a piece of the right-hand side solid rocket booster in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Once the fireball, the worst of it, there you see it in the upper right-hand corner. What is believed to have been the right side, as you sit on the shuttle, right side solid rocket booster. The trouble, one theory is, began in the left side solid rocket booster. Television pictures of the impact area showed, as I say, only those very, very small pieces of debris. The search continues. We now have a short film.
They do say least the Air Force to be more specific, which has been part of the search, and one would always still hope rescue mission out in the area where the rocket fell down. That debris being spotted is from the solid rocket booster that is being collected. The water out there is between 100 and 200 feet deep. Now, an intact shuttle, this reusable spacecraft, is designed to float, and it will float, but there's no indication in any way, shape, or form that this shuttle is intact. We perhaps, again, if you've just sort of joined us or been with us for a while, we've been on the air for a little more than 4 hours now, how people around the country have reacted. And one of the first and one of the most eloquent, because he was there, was Senator Jake Garn.
Slow motion videotapes that have been shown and looked at over and over again. NASA officials looking at these. Those on the outside, of course, none of the officials have said anything, but experts from the outside have looked at this and have indicated that perhaps what happened, as you can see in this picture here, was that there was a flame that appeared to shoot out from one of the solid rocket boosters. These are the vehicles that lift, that actually lift the giant fuel tank, which the shuttle Challenger is still attached to, is still piggybacked to as it moves into space. It would be a number of minutes, perhaps another 40 minutes, 45 minutes before the entire fuel tank would have been separated from the Space Shuttle Challenger. There is no word, as we said, on the fate of the crew. However, those who are familiar with the space program and familiar with the flights of the shuttle space program say that it's highly unlikely that anyone could have survived an explosion of this magnitude. We have, as you know, one of the 7 people on board. There were 6 crew members, 4 of whom had already flown in space on another shuttle mission flight. One of the 7 on...
Tragedy today, as we watch that one, in great contrast to what we usually get from NASA, this one signal telling us that the news conference will begin momentarily, as something of an aside, and about the power of the space program in terms of the public imagination, in terms of personality, campaigning with John Glenn during the '84 campaign. Some of you may recall he actually decided he wanted to run for president, and while I mean no political disrespect to him at all, you would wander through places with John Glenn all those years after he became the first American to orbit the Earth in the Mercury program. Gemini or Mercury? Mercury, thank you. In the Mercury program, all those years ago, and he was running for president, and people would stand. I remember once being in a shopping center with him, I think in Iowa, and people would stand there, and they never saw him, a great many people, as a political candidate, much to his regret and the regret of his staff, obviously, but they always saw him as the astronaut. And people would bring their children up to John Glenn and introduce their children who had been named after John Glenn, because his exploits in space had so captured the imagination of those of us who are so earthbound. And so it is with the people who continue to explore space. We talked to Lynn Shuttle.
Across the country, of course, we're all bound together by our common feelings of this national tragedy. This is at Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. The flag already at half-staff. And the reaction of some people from around New York City.
Solid booster rocket, that right at this point there could have been a tearing when the rocket went into great acceleration, its fastest point. But of course that alluded to this a few minutes ago when they went to a full power at about 1.
Well, the only thing I could think about with those kids in that auditorium and the trauma they must be going and what a shock it must be for them to watch something like that happen to their teacher. That's what I was thinking of.
I think maybe they are doing a little too many shuttles, so I wasn't really that shocked. If you keep going up and going up, there's more reason for error, more room for error.
The shock is it just reminded me of a disaster of previous times of how the community would react, like the Hindenburg when that went up, and the human tragedy, the loss of life.
I think what bothers you about this is that this represents the
the epitome of the technology that our country has, and everything that we've ever put into space technology manifests itself in the shuttle program. And for something like this to go wrong, what do? You start from scratch again.
Whenever you hear about something like this, you always have some kind of shock because you know it's out of the ordinary, and you don't expect things like this to happen.
Once again, Kennedy Space Center, the flag at half-staff today. Of course, more people are killed in regular airplane accidents or in tornadoes, sometimes even in car accidents. And while we're moved by those tragedies as well, we're bound together by this one because we all seem to be attached to the space program in one fashion or another. We have an emotional and a political and even a financial stake in it. And we have such an attachment to the astronauts, and especially to Krista McAuliffe, the school teacher who was representing all the school teachers in the country. And in her own way, she was representing the vicarious thrills for the rest of us, too, by going up there. She was a risk taker with the regular astronauts in hopes that she could advance her knowledge about what goes on in outer space and then share that knowledge with a new generation of young students.
% shortly.
Began. And it drove towards orbit with... Well, there are no more words required to describe to you what happened today. There cannot be anyone in the country today who does not have some sense, who has perhaps not rushed to their television set to witness either for the first time or on the many times since that you've had a chance to see it, what actually happened there today. We do have one little piece that we've talked a little bit earlier today about speculation. Dr. Max Faget, who is the head of the team that designed the shuttle and who does not work for NASA now, said he does not believe that anything about the cause of the explosion can be discerned on these tapes that we have been seeing on the air. And he says that based on what he has been seeing on television, there isn't any evidence that would help us pinpoint the cause of the explosion. And it's very important because, in part because we have perhaps been on the air for some considerable period of time, there has been a tendency to speculate a little. So I just want to quote Dr. Faget there, who was one of the team that designed the shuttle. He does not believe that anything about the cause of the explosion can be discerned from any of the tapes that have been playing on the air. ABC's Lynn Scher at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or out in California at least, not at the Jet Propulsion Lab. Yes, Lynn?
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction. We have no downlink.
That was the word late this morning as NASA officials told the world, the viewing public, that they had no information, no further word, no further link, no further communication with the astronauts on board the Space Shuttle.
The wonderful story of the Space Shuttle and its many spectacular successes have left us full of admiration. It is tragic that this success has taken its price in brave young lives. Our sympathy goes especially to their families, but also to you and to all Americans. Elizabeth R., which of course is Queen Elizabeth II. Further reaction from the Republic of Ireland, where the Prime Minister Garret Fitzgerald has expressed his sympathy and shock, and has added that we are all deeply appalled by the accident, but equally we are convinced it will not discourage America with pushing forward with the space program. A note of perhaps irony, but perhaps worth mentioning as a connection to London, and I think people over here will use this to further their feeling of closeness to the American people tonight. Ms. McAuliffe's life was insured for $1 million through Lloyd's of London. That insurance policy, we are given to understand, was donated from an American company and arranged here, Lloyd's of London. It's certainly of little consequence to her family, but something that the people over here will, of course, take note of.
Mike, thank you very much, and reaction comes clearly also from north of the border. The Canadians have long had an interest in the American space program. A Canadian astronaut has already flown on board the shuttle. He's a Canadian naval officer. I've forgotten his name, I'm sorry to say. But he's become something of a national hero in Canada as well as he travels back and forth across the nation, getting the same kind of treatment from young school children in Canada that astronauts get in this country. And of course, Canada has the great arm on board the shuttle, which has been so useful that Lynn sure described to us so accurately before. The Canadian Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, when he heard the news this morning, called up the American ambassador right away, and then there was a minute of silence in the Canadian House of Commons in Ottawa. Again, all of this, we tell you, not only to report the news that is going on, but simply to illustrate, again, just how extensively the impact of this tragedy has been felt on the message we have had from Mission Control. If we could look at it, please, from the Kennedy Space Center. It's called their video release system, and their news conference clock at the bottom simply continues to change from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, then to 4:15, then to 4:25, and it has now changed to 4:30 again. And we know, because we feel it every bit as strongly as you do.
Report that based on very preliminary searches of the ocean where the Challenger impacted this morning, these searches have not revealed any evidence that the crew of Challenger survived. The dedicated crew members of Challenger are Commander Francis Dick Scobie, pilot Michael J. Smith, mission specialist Dr. Judy Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, and Dr. Ronald McNair. And payload specialists on board were Krista McAuliffe and Greg Jarvis. All early indications in the Launch Control Center, the Kennedy Space Center, have indicated that the launch was normal up to approximately 11:40 a.m. this morning, about a minute or so into the flight. Flight controllers in the Launch Control Center here and in the Mission Control Center in Houston were polled immediately after the explosion, reported that they did not see anything unusual up to that point. The solid rocket booster recovery ships were immediately dispatched to the area, approximately 18 or so miles downrange from Kennedy, along with various Coast Guard and military ships, helicopters, and planes. I have taken an immediate action to form an interim investigating board to implement early activities in this tragedy. Data from all of the shuttle instrumentation, photographs, launch pad systems, hardware, cargo, ground support systems, and even notes made by any member of the launch team and flight ops team are being impounded for study. A formal board will be established by the acting administrator very, very shortly. Subsequent reports on this tragedy will be made by this formal review board. I am aware and have seen the media is showing footage of the launch today from the NASA Select system. We will not speculate as to the specific cause of the explosion based on that footage. It will take all the data, careful review of that data, before we can draw any conclusions on this national tragedy. Thank you.
Mr. Moore has time for just a couple of questions from each center before returning to the effort in investigating this tragedy. Please wait for the microphone and give your name and your affiliation. And we'll start right here with Jacqueline Bolden from Channel 6.
There were some reports that the shuttle perhaps rose a little slower than in previous launches, and there seemed to be a loud noise, and then the noise kind of backed off, and then a rush of noise again. Did you get any reports from anyone else that this seemed different from the people who either experienced it, saw it here live?
I have not heard any reports at all relative to that effect that you just described. None whatsoever.
Okay. Michael?
My name's Kevin Hamilton from WGIR in Manchester. The entire Teacher in Space program was designed to introduce more people, specifically youngsters, to the space program. This obviously is not the introduction you intended to make. What do you think the effect, the long-term impact that this is going to have on the youngsters that you were hoping to attract?
Well, I think we'll have to address that as time goes on. And again, I think today, the events of the day makes it much too early for me to speculate on the long-term impacts.
Okay, Al Selstead from Baltimore Sun in the first row.
Mr. Moore, at this time, do you have any estimate of how much liquid fuel was in the external tank at the time of the explosion, and how much explosive power, say in terms of TNT, that remaining liquid fuel might have been equal to?
No, sir, not at this time. You realize what we've been doing since 11:40 this morning is we immediately pulled our senior management together in this program, and I formed an interim board to ensure that all relevant data to this event would be impounded and would be made accessible to the investigating people that will go and take a look at it. I can't answer your specific questions relative to how much fuel was on board at this point in time. The board, when it's formally reported by the administrator, formally formed by the acting administrator, I'm sure will go into those kinds of questions, but I can't answer it right now.
Okay, we're going to take one more question here before going to the Johnson Space Center for questions. Here in the right opposite you, Jackie.
Peter Van Sant from CBS News. We received a call today from a member of an academic group who said he was on a tour group that was at the Pad 39B on Saturday night. This group was supposed to get off the bus to take a close look at the shuttle, but was not allowed to because this caller says they were told that a derrick arm had struck one of the tanks on the shuttle and that some repair work was being done. Are you aware of this incident, and are you aware of any problems at all with any of with either the external tank or the two solid rocket boosters?
No, we looked at that on Saturday. There was not even in the same area that of the tank. It was a small box, heater box, that had about a quarter of an inch of the insulation out of 5 inches that was scraped. It was a very minor scrape. It was repaired, and everybody, all the experts in the program, took a look at that, and so we closed it off at that point in time.
Wait for the microphone. I have to have the microphone.
There was no damage to any tank, or this arm did not strike any tank as far as...
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, we're going to the Johnson Space Center for questions. Just a couple of questions.
This is the Johnson Space Center. We have a question from Paul Reeser, Associated Press.
Yes, Mr. Moore. Was there any debris of any description recovered by the vessels, and if so, what was it?
We do not have any detailed debris reports at this point in time. That certainly is something that we're looking at, and we will be impounding all the debris that we recover, and we've set up plans here to store that debris so that the investigating group can go in and look at that and assess that in great detail. I do not have any detailed reports right now on debris.
Okay. Bruce Nichols.
Mr. Moore, with all the delays that you experienced last week, the delay again this week, was there any pressure building at all to try to get this one off the ground? Was the pressure up there? And who made the final decision to go or no go?
There was absolutely no pressure to get this particular launch off. We have always maintained that flight safety is our top priority consideration in the program, and we look at the status and readiness of the systems based on that. We thoroughly reviewed the activities over the weekend and yesterday, and continually reviewed the status of Challenger right up until launch this morning. All of the people involved in this program, to my knowledge, felt that Challenger was quite ready to go, and I made the decision, along with the recommendation from the team supporting me, that we launch.
We're going to the Marshall Space Flight Center for a couple of questions.
Martin Berkey with Huntsville Times. Can you tell me what this does to the schedule on down the line, including the launch at Vandenberg?
No, I'm not prepared to do that. What I have done is basically suspend operations for a few days till we can sit down and assess this. And, you know, we're obviously not going to pick up any flight activity until we fully understand what the circumstances were relative to this morning's launch. So in the interim, near-term time, we basically suspended operations until we get a handle on what our problems were this morning.
Nick Miller, WAFF Television in Huntsville. What part will Marshall Space Flight Center play in the investigation, since the propulsion system was the responsibility of the Space Flight Center here?
Well, they obviously have to play a very strong role in the investigating what happened this morning. As you know, the Space Shuttle program is built around a team effort, not only involving the Marshall Center, but also the Kennedy Space Center and the Johnson Space Center. All of the elements have different responsibilities, and clearly Marshall has the propulsive responsibilities on the shuttle. They will play a very dominant role, as will the other three centers I mentioned, as well as anybody that is contributing to the overall program and has some relevant information to add will certainly play a part.
Okay, we're moving to Washington for questions from NASA headquarters. Okay, there is a problem with our audio circuits to Washington. We are going to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena.
Bill Hines of the Chicago Sun-Times. Mr. Moore, in your opening remarks, you mentioned the appointment of this interim review board and said that it would be making statements from time to time. Not to put any adverse interpretations on this, it sounds a little bit like a news blackout, and I'm wondering if your objective is to consolidate information, what will be the point of issue of all those announcements in the future? And are other people not involved in that review board forbidden to talk?
Well, let me correct your statement. First of all, I said that I had appointed an interim review board. That interim review board is composed of the senior members of the NASA team here to take immediate actions on impounding data. The acting administrator is expected to appoint a formal review board very shortly, and it will be left up to that review board in order to determine its progress reports in terms of their findings. What we have done here today is to move very quickly so that all relevant data could be impounded and all actions that are needed to be taken in order to preserve as much information as we can on the circumstances of this morning can be preserved. And that's the nature of the work that I've implemented today, and I expect a formal board to be established very, very shortly, within the next day or so, by the acting administrator.
This is Roy Neal, NBC News. Jess, you've said, I believe, that future flights are temporarily frozen. The United States space program, as a result, is at a halt. Now, based on your experience, how long would you estimate that this investigation will take? 6 months, a year, before you get back in business?
Roy, it is, as you know, it is very difficult to estimate that time. It's going to be a function of what the board finds were the difficulties today and what corrective actions have to be taken before we feel confident and feel safe to fly again. And I clearly am not in a position to speculate today the length of time involved in making that determination. It will be done just as quickly as we possibly can, but also as prudently as we possibly can and as thoroughly as we possibly can.
One more question from JPL.
Bill Hines again. I've got to follow up on that first question of mine. I understand now that there will be announcements made after the permanent board is appointed. Is that correct?
There will be an announcement, I'm sure, of the members of the permanent board, yes. I believe that will be correct, and then I think that board will determine its rate of reporting based on the progress of its findings.
Okay, we're going next to the Washington NASA headquarters.
Are there any indications of sabotage or attack on the shuttle?
Okay. I'm sorry, we didn't read that question. And while they're repairing that circuit to Washington, we'll go to the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland.
Mark Weaver, WBAL Radio in Baltimore. Has this raised any questions about how reliable the space shuttle is? Might there just be too many things that could go wrong with a vessel this complicated?
Well, that question, I'm sure, will be asked, and I don't want to speculate on that at this point in time. That's certainly a logical question for somebody to ask.
Ken Carroll from WDVM in Washington. Were there any unusual weather conditions aloft or any unusual weather conditions during the launch?
None that we observed that I recall. We did put up some weather balloons early this morning. We did look at load conditions as we normally do, and the winds aloft looked good. We didn't have any exceedances as far as our load indicators are concerned, to my knowledge, and we thought everything was in good shape for a launch this morning.
Mr. Moore, I.J. Hudson from WRC-TV. Has it become a problem that you have been too good in the past, that the American people have seen flawlessly perform missions on TV almost routinely, and that something like this happens all of a sudden, it hits home even harder?
Well, I don't know how to answer your question specifically. We always strive in every flight that we perform to be as reliable and as safe as we possibly can, and to do everything that we can to ensure that the vehicle and the systems are all ready to fly. Flight safety is our number one priority in the Space Shuttle program. And certainly when you see an event like this morning, we are going to have to do a very detailed assessment of the set of circumstances to try to understand what occurred, and we will then in turn assess the impacts from that to determine where we go in the future.
I think you can hear it over the speaker.
Okay, back here at the Kennedy Space Center, we only have time for a couple more questions. Jay Barbary from NBC News in the front row here.
Jess, I would like to know if you know what happened to Challenger. Can we assume that it was consumed in the explosion? And can you tell us specifically what you know now that the recovery crew has recovered in the impact area?
I have not gotten a briefing, Jay, on what the recovery team has found at this point in time. And I have basically looked at the NASA Select photos and so forth that you did, and all I can say is that it appeared from those photos that there was an explosion. And that's about all I can say at this point in time.
Okay, we have time for only one more question, and James Fisher from the Orlando Sentinel has had his hand up a long time.
Jess, I realize this is a rather forward-thinking question, but what is the situation with the Rockwell plant about the possibility for ordering another shuttle? Has the assembly line been shut down? What's the situation with that?
Well, as we've discussed in the past, we are manufacturing structural spares for an orbiter system, and that manufacturing process is continuing. We are also buying spares for the current fleet that we have, and there is a production capability there if and when it's decided that that's the next step we want to do, is to move forward and do that. So I think the bottom line answer to your question is yes, that is a possibility, that we could implement a production capability for another orbiter if that were decided to be the thing to do.
Okay, I'm sorry to have to wind this up now. Mr. Moore has to get back immediately. As you know, he's been here since very early in the morning, and there's much to be done. Thank you all. Thank you.
Well, you may well feel the same sense of frustration that we do. They don't know anything yet, or at least they don't know anything they're going to tell us.
Or a military airplane.
That was Jesse Moore, who is the Associate Administrator of NASA, for whom we have been waiting for some hours, and perhaps the long wait created a heightened sense of anticipation about having at least some indication. You probably noticed at the end there, one of the reporters asked whether or not we could assume that in that enormous explosion which occurred a little more than 2 minutes after liftoff, that the shuttle itself had been consumed in the flames, and Jesse Moore simply would not speculate on that. There is going to be an interim review board, and then subsequently there's going to be a formal review board. And all the suggestion is there at the moment that we're in for a very long period of NASA investigation as to what actually did go on. I said it may be the lengthy wait we have had for some word on what happened to the Challenger itself, because the fate of the 7 astronauts on board has been clear for some time now, even as the search goes on in the Atlantic Ocean out about 18 miles off the Cape. And the flag at half-mast, half-staff at the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral says it all. 7 American lives lost, and no answers yet as to what anything they know at all. Let me just, before we talk to Gene Cernan, who has been tremendously helpful to us on this day, just to come.
While the solid rocket booster itself continues to go, and then we saw it break away. Now, there's another one on the other side, of course, but it does appear that it's the solid rocket booster, and that flame, as you can see, consumes the space shuttle in which 7 astronauts, including teacher Krista McAuliffe, 37 years old, of Concord, New Hampshire, tragically watched by her husband and her 2 children today, as well as by her parents. And they could barely believe their eyes as they watched that unfold in the bright blue skies over Florida. It was a tragic end to what everyone had hoped would be a triumphant flight for this young school teacher and her 6 associates, who were all veteran members of the astronaut program. To bring you up to date, in about 9 minutes, we expect to hear from President Reagan speaking directly to the nation from the Oval Office. All other official business in this nation's capital, as you might expect, has been set aside. The president was scheduled to address the joint session of Congress tonight, a brief thematic speech of what he hoped for the next year. That now has been postponed at least a week until next Tuesday night is the current schedule. The president will speak to us at 5 o'clock in 9 minutes Eastern Time from the White House tonight. And then we'll have a brief pause after that, and we'll go on with our business of covering this story. The president received word of this tragedy while he was preparing for a briefing today in the Oval Office. It was delivered to him by Vice President Bush and Admiral Poindexter, who is the Chief of National Security Affairs for the White House. The president then watched a television replay. It was, of course, the idea of his administration to put a teacher in space in an effort to engage this generation in space exploration and what can be learned from it. Krista McAuliffe was chosen in a nationwide competition, then selected from 10 finalists. Mrs. Reagan was watching in the private quarters upstairs live when the explosion occurred. Her reaction was to say, "Oh my God," and then to pray, hope against hope, that somebody could survive. Robert Bazell at the jet propulsion.
Have started. T-minus 21
It's the
seconds,
monitor.
and the solid rocket booster engine gimbal now underway. T-minus 15 seconds.
Fred. I must have monitors up here.
As I say, we have shown that to you repeatedly again and again and again today. It is not that we have a ghoulish curiosity. We just think that it's important that all members of the audience who are coming to their sets at different times of the day have an opportunity to see it. And of course, everyone is led to their own speculation based on what happened here today as well. We are now awaiting the arrival of President Reagan in the Oval Office, where he will directly address the nation on this tragedy. All schedules have been scrambled here in Washington, as I'm sure that they have been across the country today, as we try to deal with the enormity of this tragedy. What we have here is the president speaking to the nation today about this national tragedy, as it was described by Jess Moore, instead of addressing the country tonight on what he had hoped would be a message of hope and peace. And
I don't need to tell you the magnitude of this tragedy, both in terms of individuals, the 7 people who died on board Challenger this morning, and the setback to the very ambitious American space program. We now go to the White House and President Reagan.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd planned to speak to you tonight to report on the State of the Union, but the events of earlier today have led me to change those plans. Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss. 19 years ago, almost to the day, we lost 3 astronauts in a terrible accident on the ground. But we've never lost an astronaut in flight. We've never had a tragedy like this. And perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle. But they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers, but overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly. We mourn 7 heroes: Michael Smith, Dick Scobie, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe. We mourn their loss as a nation together. To the families of the 7, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy. But we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy. They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us. We've grown used to wonders in this century. It's hard to dazzle us. But for 25 years, the United States space program has been doing just that. We've grown used to the idea of space, and perhaps we forget that we've only just begun. We're still pioneers. They, the members of the Challenger crew, were pioneers. And I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them. I've always had great faith in and respect for our space program, and what happened today does nothing to diminish it. We don't hide our space program. We don't keep secrets and cover things up. We do it all up front and in public. That's the way freedom is, and we wouldn't change it for a minute. We'll continue our quest in space. There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue. I want to add that I wish I could talk to every man and woman who works for NASA or who worked on this mission and tell them your dedication and professionalism have moved and impressed us for decades, and we know of your anguish. We share it. There's a coincidence today. On this day, 390 years ago, the great explorer Sir Francis Drake died aboard ship off the coast of Panama. In his lifetime, the great frontiers were the oceans, and a historian later said he lived by the sea, died on it, and was buried in it. Well, today, we can say of the Challenger crew, their dedication was, like Drake's, complete. The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them, this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Thank you.
Speaking from the Oval Office, President Reagan evoking the memories of Francis Drake, who lost his life on this day more than 3 centuries ago. And if you will forgive a personal observation, speaking with great eloquence to the school children, saying it's part of the process of exploration and discovery that the future belongs to the brave, not to the faint of heart. Not very long from now, on most of these stations around the country, World News Tonight, as I said earlier, on the impact of this tragedy, both at home and overseas, and then at 10 o'clock this evening, an hour special on the full ABC network on this day in January 1986, which we will so long remember, and then a full expanded hour of Nightline with Ted Koppel as we continue to comfort one another, I suppose, and examine this worst of tragedies in the American space program. Marked by the flag at Cape Canaveral in Florida, flying at half-staff in memory and in honor of the 7 members of the Challenger crew who lost their lives exploring the heavens on January the 28th, 1986.
Challenger instead carried its crew to tragedy in a fiery explosion. Good evening.